My name's Jonathan Yeo, and like probably a lot of you, I'm unable to get to my place of work at the moment. So I've set up this little temporary studio at home, and I'm spending some of the lockdown seeing if it's possible to paint portraits over Facetime. I've never worked in this way before, and I've never really had people watching the whole process. So it will be an interesting experience for me. You'll see everything, including the mistakes, no doubt. But you'll also get to witness what goes on in portrait sittings and how you gradually get a sense of someone's personality and try and translate that onto a canvas. So the first sitting with Fearne was basically about getting an outline and drawing onto the canvas, essentially. The second is where it starts to get more interesting, because you start to block in colours and shapes and turn it from hopefully a two-dimensional to a more three-dimensional image. Whether that's possible from the limited information on the FaceTime call with less dynamic range, but above all, it's a flat image, and so you're not seeing how someone's face is constructed. Even movement looks a bit different, but we'll see how it goes. First session was just about trying to get a sense of your kind of where you are in the picture and start drawing it out. It's not completely right, but it's definitely sort of roughly there. And now I'm just going to start putting down little areas of colour, and then it might be that I have them as a base colour and then layer on top. But I might actually just start kind of mixing them together on the canvas. And one of the things I've done, and I mentioned it before on these streams, but I mix a little bit of clove oil into the painting medium, which is mostly sort of obviously linseed oil and a bit of terps. And you've got to be really careful with it, because if you use too much, literally the painting might never dry. Wow! So you've got to sort of, in the studio I do it with a little pipette and put a few drops in, and it just gives you a few more days of working on into the sort of wet paint, which can make all the difference if you're sort of if you're doing a portrait and you sort of think you've got it right, you come in the next day and you see there's some things that are wrong. It means you can carry on working on them.
Because obviously you've got differing, like varying coloured backgrounds that you'll use with all those lovely tones in there. Do you pick a certain background with the person you're working with, or you just sort of go for whatever, you don't mind?
I do, but I don't usually kind of do it with a sort of strategy or a kind of plan of this type of canvas suits that kind of person. There are certain colour schemes I know work, so I think for the one of you, there's several kind of colour backgrounds which would work for your sort of skin colouring and your hair and your bold sort of, and it's like and some general energy. I think there's like some things can be heavier, some things can be lighter. It's a little, it's not a very precise science, and sometimes you get halfway through and realise you've done it wrong, and then have to work out whether to start again. How
often is it that you'll just go, this is shit, I'm binning it, I'm starting again?
Well, early on, quite a lot.
Really?
But even now, it's one of those things I just expect. It's one of the things, because I launch quickly into the painting, as people will see that I think some people are more cautious about it, and probably rightly so. And I just kind of often just go bowling in, which is because when it works well, you can get on such a nice roll with it. But then you expect sometimes the flip side is you have to expect it not always to work out well. And I think the thing, if you're going to start it again, you've got to just make the decision early, so you haven't wasted too much time on the first version. Yeah,
that is so disheartening. I've done it loads of times, or I've just stopped halfway through and gone, that's going in the loft and I will never ever get it out again. That one can just be gone.
It's funny, isn't it? And usually you're right, but occasionally they'll be like, that's a good picture. Yeah. Why was I thinking? And of course, I think it's often to do with what your expectations are. And so you often when you're starting a picture, you've got an idea in mind, even if it's a vague one. And then if you start working and it doesn't end up like that, you think it's a failure. But actually, you could often not see that it's sometimes equally interesting or occasionally more interesting because you've done something unusual with it without intending to.
When you're starting a picture, and like you say, you're kind of quick to get to the paint and you don't spend ages faffing around with charcoal or whatever. Is there a sort of a sense of impatience? Like, are you really eager to see what it turns out like, or are you quite patient when you're painting?
That's a good question. I'm eager to get to a point. There's a nice point. So the initial drawing is a bit boring because you're having to concentrate on it. And, it's not a question of, what it's going to look like, because what the sort of a few marks, outlines are going to look like. But once the paint starts going on and the colours, especially the colours, are a bit different from anything you've done, and each face is different as well. Each portrait takes on a sort of life of its own really after a certain point, and you want to get to that point of where it starts to become unique to that person and unique to maybe things you've done before. And sometimes you then get to a final point, maybe kind of like you've done about 80% of it, and there are a couple of things wrong, maybe with the drawing, there's something that's not quite right with the expression. And even though it's relatively, small area of the picture to fix, it can take ages, partly because, you maybe it's a bit of a puzzle. You're trying to sort of work out what it is that's wrong and solve that. But also, it's less interesting because you're not transforming sort of like, you're not kind of really sort of changing the picture very much overall. So then, in my case anyway, I then get a bit bored and then find excuses not to do it and do other things. I'm a bit worried now, after what we're talking about, I'm putting the paint on too fast. I think hopefully what I'm doing is putting it on lightly enough that if it's dry, I can just do another layer over the top, so it won't be kind of... It's when you put it on thickly, thinking you're going to do a lot more to it, and then you just leave it a little bit too long, that causes chaos. What I tend to do when I'm working normally is often have someone in to sit for me in a morning, say, and spend an hour or two painting, maybe go out for lunch with them, because sometimes you see things when they think you've stopped working, but you're obviously, and they relax a bit and their whole body language changes and that kind of thing. Then I might go back to it in the afternoon, and I take lots of photos as well, so I can. But while they're fresh in your mind, and even the next day, you can because you're therefore more selective about what information you take from the photos.
The one thing I've kept up consistently is biro sketching, which is one of my favourite things to do. I've illustrated my last 3 books purely with biro. I think because you're committing and there's no going back, you just get really focused, like you're so focused. I think the thing I feel insecure about sometimes, and I don't share too much of my art online because of it, I think I'm still establishing what my style is. I think, I can paint in a competent way, but I haven't really figured out yet, or had the time to figure out, right, this is my style. I don't think I've established it. So I think the biro stuff I feel like, that feels very me. But painting wise, I'm still working it out.
I think it's difficult also when you're conscious of that, because I think there's some styles, I think it just sort of happens. So maybe the biro is the style. Maybe I'll find a way of painting that's like that.
When did that happen for you? Was it? Have you always painted it in the way that you paint, or did that just start to become something that you thought, oh, actually, this is what's making me happy. This is what works.
I remember people saying to me early on, what's your style? Because I was kind of trying all kinds of different things. It's a bit, kind of got a bit of a collage. My style certainly early on was, and it sort of evolves, I think. And actually now, I can certainly see a version of it in the better early work, or the early work I like better. But obviously there were also a lot of early works which weren't very good at all, and I was experimenting with things, but unless you experiment and try it, you don't know that you don't like it or that it's not going to work. And so I think, and also what you were saying about that sort of confidence, when you do it a lot, you're less worried about getting things wrong. And I think that's the thing, when you haven't done something for a while, whatever it is, you're a bit more self-conscious and you're worried about making mistakes. When you're doing it all the time, you think you're much more likely to sort of just chuck paint on, but it doesn't matter if you're going to change it later. You're not worried about that sense of kind of like committing a marker, then it's there. One thing I try and say, and when I'm doing it with the kids, is don't worry about trying to make it look like that person. I think that's the thing we all get hung up on. And actually it's quite liberating when you actually just take that out of it. Otherwise, you're sort of thinking about that and little else. You can, and I think that's where you get much more beautiful paintings anyway, and much more kind of original things. And I mean, I think that portraiture is a subtle caricature, basically, and so it's like exaggerating the kind of certain sort of features, and maybe ignoring other things, and the more you get that right, the better the portrait, I think. Just doing something exactly how they look isn't so interesting.
Yeah, I need to get out of that then, for sure, because I think I'm basically a sort of classic Virgo perfectionist where I want everything to be just so. So I'm not very good at going, oh, well, I'll just go for the character more than what it looks like. I think I'm still definitely aiming more for, I want this to be accurate, and that's what ends up getting in the way, I guess, really. Are you losing anything visually from the person not being there with you? Is it harder for you to get a sense of the texture or the light, or are you finding it all right?
Yes, a bit. I mean, so like I'm looking at you now. Our eyes have a much wider dynamic range than a camera does, and particularly one that's then compressing and streaming these sort of images. The kind of subtleties and distinctions within the sort of like bright parts and dark parts of the sort of image, particularly. And so I think I won't get quite as much of the sort of like real kind of subtleties of the skin tones. And you also, there's a little bit of because you've got two eyes. When someone's in front of you, you're very aware of the actual sort of depth and shape of their heads. And so there's that. Actually, in some ways, it's better than taking photos, working from photos, because at least there's someone, you've got that actual, a moving human being there who's animated, who's reacting to things. So you're seeing that side of it very well. And sometimes less information means you kind of focus more on what you can get. So I think they're going to end up being slightly different, but they might be just as interesting or interesting in a different way. I
did a couple of portraits of my mum when I was doing, I don't know, my A-level or my GCSE, and she was sat there, and I quite enjoyed it, but I've never had a live model since. I also worry that would hinder me, sort of seeing them move, and watching them animated might, actually knock me off track more. Because of the movement, I'm not able to get that sort of accuracy, I guess. But do you feel that actually what you're able to implement there is what some portraits will be lacking in, which is that sort of character and the personality of that person? Is that what you're getting from it?
I think so. Well, certainly so far, that's exactly what's happened. Is that you get a sense of, an energy there, which and so what you're slightly sacrificing in sort of precision, you're making up for. I think it's much better than making a picture from a bad photograph, something like that, where it's static and it's not very convincing.
There is that sort of element of, have you captured the essence of that person? And also, if it is someone off the TV or a musician or whatever, there's obviously a sort of a persona, and then usually there's a lesser version in how flamboyant they might be, or they might just have a slightly reduced version of themselves outside of their work. And it's interesting to see how you would sort of pick that up, because I'm sure, like I've met so many people now, kind of off the record, where they haven't necessarily been in a work situation and they're big characters, but actually when you're talking to them, they're very quiet and still, and it's it's a different personality altogether.
One of the things that normally happens with a paint portrait is, you have these amazing conversations with people, which of course is just goes on in the studio, no one's listening, and then what comes out of it is something on canvas, and so you're protected, and people don't feel too exposed to it. And if you're filming the whole thing and streaming it, then it'd be a slightly unreal environment to do one. When it's someone you don't know at all, but it might still work. I mean, I think we'll find out. Hey, look, I am. That's good. And if I keep going, it's like we were saying before, I kind of want to do another hour or two, which is, I don't think it works for us now. So why don't we pick it up? If it works for you, maybe Saturday.